Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like. It helps more than you might think. In early October 1915, one of the largest cruise ships, the Silvernight, which had set sail from Southampton to New York, made an unplanned emergency stop at the Canary Islands. Local authorities, baffled by the ship's unexpected arrival, began interviewing passengers to understand the reason for the disruption. Yet no one could explain the stop, except for an elderly woman named Eleanor Wilson. She quietly came forward to speak with the deputy, a look of weary knowledge in her eyes. As Eleanor spoke, the deputy's expression shifted from curiosity to shock, and he quickly ordered one of his men to record her every word. Her account of the events on board was unlike anything he had ever heard. When the deputy and his men investigated her claims, what they discovered left them unsettled and terrified. This is her story. At first I didn't think it was real. It waits to talk to me, especially when it's dark. Sometimes I can't sleep. I tell it to leave me alone, but it won't. It shows me things, horrible things. It feels like I'm losing my mind, and I don't know how much longer I can take this. The very first month after our retirement, Eddie returned home with a peculiar expression on his face. It wasn't the usual tired look from a long day in the garden or the playful grin he wore after spending time with our friendly neighbors. No, this was something else, something unreadable. He called me over and said he wanted to show me something. I felt a mix of curiosity and unease about what could possibly warrant such a dramatic entrance. Then he pulled out 2 tickets and handed them to me. Just one glance at them, and I knew what they were. First-class tickets for the trip to New York on the Silvernight cruise liner. Even now, the memory ignites excitement within me. I had always dreamed of a voyage across the endless ocean, breathing in the salty sea air and reveling in the thrill of being at sea. I imagined myself strolling along the deck, sipping tea, and watching the sunset each evening. "A cruise?" I exclaimed. He nodded, a smile spreading across his face as he revealed that we would leave in a week. I still couldn't believe it. You know that electrifying feeling when you finally get to live your dreams? We would escape the routines of our daily lives and immerse ourselves in a world of luxury. The thought sent my heart racing. I knew that securing first-class tickets might have cost him a fortune, but it didn't matter to him. Seeing my happiness was worth every penny. The long-awaited day finally arrived, and the thrill buzzed through me as we boarded the Silvernight. We were escorted to our cabin, which was spacious and luxurious, featuring a large bed and a private bathroom with a glass-enclosed bathtub in one corner. As we settled in, anticipation filled the air. Our first meal was a grand feast, shared at a table with other first-class passengers. Laughter and conversation flowed as we savored a variety of dishes. I opted for a creamy soup followed by succulent roast beef while he ordered the same. In that moment, we were truly happy. Little did I know how short-lived that happiness would be. As night fell, we were meant to return to our cabin, but when I asked him to join me, he was so engrossed in conversation with the other passengers that he asked to meet later. I could have stayed out with him, sipping drinks and enjoying the evening breeze like the others, but my bones felt weary from the long day, and I craved a warm bath. Reluctantly, I left the lively atmosphere and made my way back to the cabin. Upon entering, I turned on the hot water and prepared my bath in the glass-enclosed tub. Stripping down, I stepped into the soothing warmth, letting the hot water envelop me like a comforting embrace. I let out a contented sigh as the heat worked its magic on my tired muscles. Closing my eyes, I sank deeper into relaxation, losing track of time. Minutes slipped by, perhaps 10, perhaps more, as I indulged in the tranquility of the moment. The cabin was quiet, broken only by the steady dripping of water from the tap. Then, a voice echoed through the stillness, soft and indistinct. I opened my eyes, half expecting to see someone enter. Perhaps a crew member or maybe my husband had finally returned. "Eddie?" I called, but there was no response. The silence deepened, and an unsettling unease settled over me. The steam rising from the hot water enveloping me suddenly dissipated, and the bath began to cool. Confused, I turned on the tap again, but the water flowed out barely lukewarm. Panic surged through me. How could the once steaming water have turned cold in mere minutes? I quickly stepped out of the tub, wrapping a towel around myself, my heart racing as the unsettling feeling washed over me. As I emerged from the bathroom, Eddie stood by the window. I smiled, teasing him about spying on me, but he quickly replied that he'd just come in moments before. I thought about telling him about the voice I'd heard, but decided against it. I didn't want him to think I was starting to hear things. Instead, I mentioned the faulty hot water tap, knowing how much he loved a warm bath. Hopefully, he'd ask one of the crew members to look into it. "Already giving trouble?" he muttered. He stepped into the bathroom and turned on the tap. Steam filled the air, and he turned to me, surprised. "The water's fine," he said. "Plenty of hot water." I was baffled. I'd felt the cold water prickling my skin only minutes before. I held back, unsure now if I'd imagined it, dismissing it as just a trick of the mind. But little did I know, that was only the beginning of something I could never have anticipated. That night, I had an unsettling dream that left me with a pounding headache the next morning. Though I couldn't remember the details, fragments of darkness and distant, eerie sounds lingered in my mind, leaving me with a haunting sense of dread. Noticing my discomfort, my husband insisted on taking me to the ship's clinic. The doctor examined me and prescribed medication for my headache. As we walked back to our cabin, a sudden sound made my blood run cold. A child's laughter, faint and echoing through the corridor. I turned to look, but no one was there. "Did you hear that?" I asked him, pointing down the empty hall. "Hear what, dear?" he asked, looking puzzled. "A child's laughter," I replied, feeling a chill. Eddie shook his head slowly, his face serious. "There are no children on this ship," he said. "This is an adults-only cruise, for people seeking peace and luxury. I spoke with one of the crew members earlier, and they confirmed it. No children are allowed." I felt a shiver as I stared down the empty corridor. Why would I hear a child's laughter if no children were on board? The medication worked wonders, and I felt the pain in my head slowly fade away. For the first time in days, I didn't hear anything unusual. One evening, after I'd finished a warm shower, steam filled the small bathroom and fogged up the mirror. I turned off the water and reached for a towel. Just then, I heard a faint giggle. I froze, then quickly turned sharply toward the sound. I called out, but as usual, there was no response. As I turned to face the mirror, the fog slowly cleared, and there it was, something that hadn't been there before, a tiny, childlike handprint pressed into the condensation. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly dried off and rushed out of the bathroom, frantic to find my husband. I found him in the cabin, absorbed in a book. "Eddie, you have to see this," I exclaimed, dragging him toward the bathroom. I pointed at the mirror, but the handprint was gone. "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" he asked, looking confused. "There's nothing there." I was stunned. I had seen it, and it had been real. He brushed it off as nothing more than my imagination, and that infuriated me. I knew what I had seen. It wasn't just in my head. He told me to get some rest, but his disbelief hurt. I had hoped he'd at least stand by me, even if no one else did. That night we argued. The headaches became persistent again, prompting me to make frequent visits to the clinic for medication. The doctor prescribed various remedies, but none seemed to provide lasting relief. One afternoon, while sitting in the waiting room, I overheard voices coming from outside. A young woman was rushed into the clinic, her face pale and drawn. She was coughing violently, and her body was racked with seizures. The doctor and nurses immediately surrounded her, but her condition only seemed to worsen. They managed to stabilize her, but the cause of her illness remained a mystery. Later that evening, I learned that the woman had fallen ill suddenly, with her symptoms appearing without warning. Even the doctors were perplexed, unable to diagnose her condition. As I lay in bed that night, the image of the sick woman kept resurfacing in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that something was wrong. A few days later, my husband and I decided to spend more time in the lounge with the other passengers. By then, most of the passengers had retired to their cabins, leaving the lounge nearly deserted. We were among the last to leave. As we stood up to go, I thought I heard a faint voice. I turned, scanning the room, but the only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. Then, a giggle echoed through the room. I turned again, my gaze falling on a large mirror across the room. What I saw there froze me in place. Even now, the image is burned into my mind. In the reflection, I saw a small girl dressed in a white gown, her hair dripping wet. Her pale face was filled with an eerie sadness. I called to Eddie, pointing at the mirror, but he dismissed it. "There's nothing there," he said, unimpressed. His reaction made the terror grow inside me. Was I losing my mind? Had his suspicions about me been right all along, that I might need to see a psychiatrist? My husband grew angry as I tried to explain and convince him of what I had seen, but he refused to listen. His patience wore thin, and he became frustrated with what he perceived as my increasingly erratic behavior. Disappointed and frustrated, I turned away from the mirror, the weight of his disbelief pressing heavily on me. The image of the little girl haunted me all night as I lay awake, unable to shake the unsettling vision from my mind. Almost every other day, I caught glimpses of the girl in the corridors, or lurking in the shadows, as though she were following me, watching my every move. Desperate, I confided in Eddie, telling him about these eerie encounters. But he dismissed it all, insisting there were no such things as ghosts or spirits. One afternoon, I returned to the cabin and found something unsettling. A series of wet footprints on the carpet, leading from the bathroom to the bedroom. They were too small to belong to an adult. I followed the trail, watching it fade away before my eyes. I confronted Eddie, demanding an explanation. He looked at me, perplexed, and insisted he hadn't left the footprints. I was certain he was lying. After all, who else could it have been? He was the only other person in the cabin. But then it hit me. There was only one possible explanation. The little girl had left the footprints. She was real, and she had been in our cabin. I could no longer tell what was real and what was imagined. The line between the two had blurred, and I felt myself losing my grip on reality. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant presence of the figure was pushing me to the brink of madness. I screamed, begging her to leave me alone, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. The others, oblivious to her presence, looked at me with pity, as if I were having a mental breakdown. I had to escape. Desperate, I rushed to the clinic. But when I stepped inside, what I saw drove me over the edge. The clinic was filled with sick passengers, their faces pale and emaciated. Some were coughing violently, while others muttered incoherently. The doctor rushed from patient to patient, but no one seemed to improve. They all looked the same, just like the very first passenger brought in. At first, the doctors thought it was just seasickness, as expected on a journey like this, but as the illness spread, we all knew it was something far worse. A deep fear gripped my heart. First, it was the girl's presence, and now, it was the strange illness afflicting the passengers. I began to think there might be a connection. Perhaps she was a harbinger of doom or something even darker. The doctor advised that all healthy passengers avoid the clinic to prevent spreading the illness in case it was contagious. I left feeling worse than when I'd arrived. I couldn't bear the torment any longer. The constant sightings of her, the mysterious illness, the growing unease among the passengers. Whenever I tried to talk to my husband about it, he would wave it away, brushing off my concerns. So I kept quiet, hoping that not speaking of it might make it feel less real. But I was wrong. I began to notice peculiar words written on mirrors and walls. Words like kitchen and chef appeared again and again, and sometimes unfamiliar words in languages I didn't recognize. I tried to ignore them, but they always found a way to demand my attention. During one of my moments alone, a young steward approached me. He mentioned that he had noticed I looked troubled as I sat alone in a corner. I didn't deny it. I explained my situation, the strange occurrences, and the ghostly child. To my surprise, he didn't dismiss me as crazy. Instead, he listened and said something that made me realize I wasn't just seeing things. He told me, "You're not the first to see her, Mrs. Wilson," he confessed. "There's a rumor, an old sailor's tale, about a young girl who drowned on this ship many years ago. They say she's still here, trapped between worlds. I wasn't sure how I felt hearing that, but I knew it was a mixture of fear and fascination. That night, I finally slept well, comforted by the fact that I wasn't crazy. As the days went by, the situation on the ship worsened. More passengers were falling ill, with symptoms ranging from fever and chills to severe respiratory distress. The doctor was overwhelmed, unable to keep up with the growing number of patients. One evening, I saw something truly horrifying. A passenger was being carried away on a stretcher, his body limp and unresponsive. I feared he had already died. I knew I had to act before it got worse, before someone else ended up on that stretcher. The little girl continued to appear, and this time, I decided to follow her, to listen to whatever she had to show me. She led me on a curious, almost mystical journey through the ship, pulling me deeper into the mystery. I followed her, my heart pounding, as she led me toward the ship's kitchen. Inside, I spotted the head chef. The girl pointed at him and nodded, then vanished. He didn't see her. No one else did. So I hid behind a cupboard, watching the chef prepare the passengers' meals. When he finished, he retrieved a sack from an odd-looking box and secretly poured its contents into one of the pots. The pot was pristine white, with a minimalistic design and a silver handle that looked almost too refined to be used for cooking. I told Eddie what I had seen, warning him not to eat from that pot, but as usual, he dismissed me. When dinner time arrived, the passengers eagerly dug into their meals, except for me, who had noticed which pot the dish came from, and a few others who simply didn't like it. Everything seemed fine, until the next day. The passengers who ate began to fall ill. The ship was forced to dock at the Canary Islands, where the sick passengers could finally receive proper care. Unfortunately, my husband was among those affected. He was weak and feverish, but fortunately, the doctors managed to stabilize him. I knew I had to act and report my suspicions about the strange occurrences aboard the ship, especially regarding the head chef's odd behavior. I wasn't sure how the authorities would react, or if they would even believe me, but I couldn't ignore what I had seen. It was about the lives of the passengers and the safety of the crew. As I left the ship, I never saw the little girl again, but her presence remained etched in my memory. I still wonder if she ever found peace. After Eleanor reported the incident, the local police on the island launched an investigation. A thorough search of the kitchen revealed a hidden stash of the substance she had seen. The head chef was arrested and charged with poisoning and attempted murder. Eleanor's husband recovered slowly, as did the other passengers. But for Eleanor, the journey had left an indelible mark. You've made it, for now. Thank you for joining on this horrifying journey. If you want more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and to follow on other platforms. There are many more stories to come, and if you enjoyed this, please like the video. It really helps. Let me know your favorite part or any suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, if you can.